So as we begin our foray into America's wars, into and through the national history and the development of the American ethos, there are 2 points I want to begin with. Um, First, remember the distinction between mythos and logos, between those two capacities of human knowing. The borders are sometimes permeable, they're not always super clear, they overlap with one another. But what we'll be doing is following points of historical logos, of verifiable moments of American martial action, but we'll be concentrating on an ever-evolving mythos, on the stories that have compelled us to one or another, often conflicting, sense of national identity. One of the dangers of American civil discourse in our present time is that these two categories are not often recognized to be distinct. And so we, as a culture, argue over the inarguable. We abdicate our duty to history regarding the verifiable. They get mixed up. We don't answer to either. Both sides loses. Both sides lose. The mythos, the logos, neither has the potency that they might otherwise have within our human understanding of ourselves, our communities, and the cosmos within which we believe ourselves to live. We find ourselves, politically speaking, at cross purposes, centering our discourse, insofar as it even can be called that, around false dilemmas. We're polarized, and we too often turn away from the lessons of history. As historian John Meacham says, we'll read him later in the course, neglecting history, we find ourselves under the tyranny of the present, believing that the struggles we face today are so unique and so unprecedented that context historical lessons can offer us nothing, that history has nothing to tell us. And of course, I believe that history, that historical context, in active engagement of the complex and conflicted national heritage, that it does offer us something. Self-knowledge, lessons on what not to do, on how not to be, and mostly because I'm an optimist and a pragmatist, a real path to hope. This is what history offers us, which brings me to my second opening point. This class is political, and centering on mythos as it does, its context will reside in that arena. The content of the course will reside in that arena of our lives and ourselves that's governed by belief, by what we individually believe. So it seems fair that you should know a little something of my own beliefs, just so you know who you're listening to. I teach in a public university on purpose because I believe in access. I believe in access to knowledge. I believe that knowledge is power. It might not make you rich, it probably won't, but it might just help to make you whole and empowered to live a complete and contented life on this planet. I believe in the First Amendment, that each of you has the foundational right to metaphysical self-determination. The realm of mythos is a realm that it is your inheritance to determine for yourself. I don't believe that you need to agree with me to learn from me in this class, or to succeed in life, or to be an excellent partner with me in civil discourse. I don't require agreement. Civil discourse, in fact, requires some disagreement. I am an ardent patriot. That's something that may come out in the course of the next units. But I'm also an uneasy one. As the proud daughter of a Marine combat veteran, I've been raised to believe in the promise of this nation, in our national capacity to be a diverse and truly free polity. And I'm also keenly aware of those times and places when America has not fulfilled that promise. And so my patriotism, while ardent, is uneasy, and it remains uneasy. It was the founders' stated intent, enshrined in the preamble to the Constitution, to establish a more perfect union. And so I come back to this. I read it as a continuous project, more perfect, ever more perfect. More perfect than what? Becomes one of our questions. More perfect than it was yesterday. If I have a goal in this class, it's twofold. To give you a greater understanding of the American culture, myth, self-understanding as it runs through history, and to inspire in each of you a more active engagement in the development of that, in crafting a more perfect union, not for me and not for yourself, but for the future. Futurity is baked into this nation's founding principles. So Thomas Paine, one of the founders, famously said, "If there be troubles, let them be in our time, that our children may know peace." It's notable that Paine had no children. Our children here, it's the citizenry's children. It's all children. Um, it's the future for we, the people, after those of us who are here right now are long gone, right? If there be troubles, let them be in our time, that our children may know peace. That futurity is there, and it's there today too. U.S. Senator Cory Booker says, "My parents would reinforce to me that you drink deeply from wells of freedom and liberty that you did not dig." He goes on to say, they say, "Boy, don't grow dumb, fat, and happy on all this that you have. You have to metabolize your blessings to do good, to make a difference." And first comes knowledge of history, of how those wells were dug and where they need improvement. Patrick Henry, another founder jumping back into the past. "I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging the future but by the past." And so we'll look to the past over the coming weeks, working our way to the present in order to ensure that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is preserved into the future for all people. And that we know will require some recuperation, some redemption, some reparation. This is not a perfect union. It wants to be a more perfect one. There is no end point because the end always opens to the future, to that ever more perfect union. That'll be a theme. And so we begin with the revolution. Here we have it, the Revolutionary War. Something truly new under the sun. So very imperfect, but with immeasurable promise, potential. The Revolutionary War, this is also the model that you will see each unit open with. This is how each unit will begin, with the name of a war, the dates during which it was waged. Here we have 1775 to 1783. And an attempt to articulate the casus belli, the cause of war, the reason for fighting. For the Revolutionary War, it's pretty well articulated as self-determination, freedom, liberty. Now, of course, the personal is always wrapped up with political motivations. So self-determination, freedom, and liberty were, I would argue, the authentic causes for this war. They were the authentic reason that got people to sacrifice life and limb, right? To sacrifice their family and their hope for a future, to sacrifice their own lives and livelihoods. But again, the personal can't be separated from that. They're, Hancock and Adams, we know the story of the Boston Tea Party, right? They dumped the tea, they dumped the king's tea into the harbor, the Boston Harbor, because why should Britain get to regulate the price of tea, right? It was a no taxation without representation issue, and that's important, right? We take that as part of our national heritage, as a cause that we move forward with. You can't tax me if I don't get to represent myself in determining to some small degree. It's harder with 300 million people to really be able to vote on it. Like, where do I want my tax money to go? Without being represented in the purposes for which those taxes will be used, then I don't want to be taxed, right? That's a founding principle. But it's also worth knowing that those guys, Hancock and Adams, were themselves black market tea sellers, right? And the tea they dumped into the harbor was surplus inventory that would have tanked their own prices. So, who's to say that they didn't think of that when they were also building a very strong foundational tenet that we move according to today: no taxation without representation, right? It's never simple, and personal motivations weigh in, but I digress. This very simplified version of the intro slide will grow more complicated as we move into the future and moving towards the present. So, but here we have the casus belli, really self-determination, freedom, liberty, and something that runs throughout the semester that we will see, sometimes explicitly, sometimes not, is a notion of American exceptionalism, which we need to get out there early on, right? Many of you will have heard of this. It was established before the Revolution, and we see it actively at play today. So John Adams wrote in 1765, "I always consider the settlement of America with reverence and wonder, as the opening of a grand scene and design in providence." He doesn't use the word God, but he uses everything he can get at without saying God, the Bible. That's American exceptionalism. Frederick Douglass in 1857 writes, "I know of no country where the conditions for effecting great changes in the settled order of things, for the development of right ideas of liberty and humanity are more favorable than here in the United States. It's a bit of a tempered American exceptionalism. It's contextual, right? I know of no other nation where we're better set up to do this, to make great strides towards justice and humanity. Further into the 20th century, Eleanor Roosevelt. It is essential that we remind ourselves frequently of our past history, that we recall the shining promise that it offered to all men everywhere who would be free, the promise that it is still our destiny to fulfill. So in the mid-20th century, Eleanor Roosevelt sees America as exceptional, especially in terms of the promise yet to be fulfilled and the moral requirement of the citizenry to fulfill that promise and to fulfill its own destiny through that. American exceptionalism, as it says here, is the notion that the American experiment was divinely ordained, that America would be the new Jerusalem, a city upon the hill, a shining light unto the world, right? In this new nation, natural law or God's law, depending on how you fell out on that one, would be encoded in and enforced through positive law or, national law, laws, the laws that we, obey or suffer consequences. That humans' law would represent or aim at as close as possible an approximation of divine law, of natural law, of the law that is given, not found, not made, but given, right? So on the bottom, you see images sort of vaguely representative of this, from Betsy Ross to, on the far right, you've got Ben Franklin's proposed national seal. It was rejected. And it's worth looking closely at this, right? Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. There was a notion that the revolution itself was a fulfillment of God's command, God's implicit command, a very biblical notion of God. You can see in the background that the image there is Moses leading the chosen people in the Hebrew Bible to the Promised Land and following the pillar of smoke by day and fire by night. So for Ben Franklin, arch rationalist that we understand him to be, the revolutionary movement was a movement towards a biblically ordained, divinely ordained promise, right? So this is American exceptionalism, and the shining city upon the hill was, reinvoked by Reagan. This was Reagan's campaign slogan for a lot of it. Obama told us that we're not done perfecting our union. That was, I'm looking at sort of our most recent presidential commentary on American exceptionalism, and Obama was big on the shining city on the hill still being under construction. That's something we still need to be working on. We're not done perfecting our union, he told us. Trump has urged the nation to make America great again. And this was Reagan's slogan before it was Trump's. In the 1980 presidential race, the only difference was he said, "Let's make America great again." But just so you know, that slogan has a history. Both of these, whether or not the city on the hill is still under construction, whether or not it used to be great and we need to make it great again, whether or not it is great, all of these participate in this notion of American exceptionalism, that there is some destiny to this nation, something new under the sun, something great and divinely ordained. Across the political spectrum, American exceptionalism and a sense of futurity govern the day. And that sense of exceptionalism is tied to a couple founding creeds or mythic assertions from the nation's beginning, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's 1776, right? Self-evident truths are by their nature mythic. They're in the realm of mythos, not logos. If I hold certain truths to be self-evident, that's an indication that I'm not talking about verifiability. It's not verifiable. In fact, by any logical measure, and we can just be honest about this, right? It doesn't make it less true. To be a mythic truth does not make a truth less true. It makes it a different kind of true. It's not answerable to verifiability, nor was it ever meant to be, right? That all men are created equal is by any logical measure just falsifiable. It's just not true. Like, what is our measure? Is it height? Is it weight? Is it strength? Is it IQ? Is it the, spatial awareness? Is it emotional intelligence? According to none of these measurable, verifiable factors are all men or all people created equal. But to hold those truths to be self-evident is to assert them as governing in your life, compelling, authoritative because they're compelling, right? That's your mythic realm. It's not about proving it. The founder said we hold it anyway, right? It's not about verifiability. And in 1787, the preamble to the Constitution clearly listed the values once more, those measures of success according to which we, the people, would be called to judge ourselves, right? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Now, I challenge you to come up with a better list of purposes, a better set of shared purposes, right? This is a good list. These were mostly wealthy slaveholding white men, but they wrote better than they were. They wrote according to a model of justice that I can't improve upon. And again, with a strong sense of futurity, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. No. Now, before we move on, who's our, who's we, right? This is a huge part of the battle in defining American values, right? Who constitutes the people? And we've historically done a good job of expanding that notion, not limiting it, right? Could it use more expansion? It could. Especially on racial lines. I think it's pretty clear right now. The 13th, the 14th Amendment, these did not bring equality. And there are those who also offer strong arguments for and some strong arguments against, but those who would very much like to see an Equal Rights Amendment, which made it to Congress for decades, but was never ratified by the states. And the Equal Rights Amendment would be geared towards articulating clearly that we the people doesn't just include men. Even though men is the word enshrined in the founding documents, the Equal Rights Amendment would clearly articulate, it would assert that by men, of course, we mean women too. Some argue that it would be gratuitous, some don't. But yeah, we have done a good job at expanding who constitutes, who's counted within this assertion. But what I'd like to highlight is that this assertion, as it stands, is pretty phenomenal. So again, I challenge you. And if you come up with a better one, send it to me. But so liberty is huge from the beginning, as is security. And let's move on to Ben Franklin at this point. As you read, Ben Franklin's quote, used in our era mostly to argue against various forms of technological surveillance, was originally rooted in a tax dispute, right? Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. It is in true Franklin form, very pithy, excellently worded. He was a rhetorician for sure. Franklin wanted the Penns to pay. He wanted them to pay taxes to support the war on the frontier, which, by the way, was part of the genocidal project, removing the native tribal folks from their land. He was arguing for defense spending, for massive defense spending, for taxation. It doesn't fall out along clear political lines today. The context has so thoroughly changed that the model he provides with this sentiment doesn't exactly, if you look at context, he doesn't fit into the pigeonholes we've established for our political identities. Historical context is always more complicated than a bumper sticker, right? But this quote continues to have currency for a reason, because maintaining both liberty and security is challenging. It's hard. It requires compromise, responsiveness. Obama's quote here, I think it's important to understand that you can't have 100% security and then have 100% privacy and zero inconvenience. We're going to have to make some choices as a society, right? It's not quite as pithy as Franklin, but it is to the point that this is a compromise, and it actively will be. And that's part of the reason why this quote comes into the future, into the present in the way it does. And on to Jefferson. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. As you read, this came from a complicated context as well. 1786, Shea's rebellion, a poor, unpaid Revolutionary War veteran, led an attempt to get the guns out of a Massachusetts armory. And the feds were broke, so they couldn't afford to put down this rebellion. So Massachusetts merchants funded a private militia to do it, right? And the question that this whole event sort of put forward early in the nation's existence, trying to find its feet as a nation. Is it a nation, right? What is the, right? This is, federalism was still an active part of the debate at this point. The question is, how strong should the Fed be, right? Can a strong central federal government really authentically support the ideals and aspects of character that America was fostering? Independence, self-determination. Can we have a strong federal government and also maintain those things? Jefferson was a little cavalier in this quote, mostly because he saw no real threat in the rebellion, right? In Shea's rebellion, these were old, injured Revolutionary War veterans. They were poor, they were tired, they were completely abandoned by the federal government, and he just sort of thought, well, this isn't a real threat, why bother? Massachusetts is taking care of it, I got bigger problems. As you also read, Jefferson's use of domestic military force remains unprecedented. He used the military on domestic soil in a way that no subsequent president has. Private militias could not be allowed for President Thomas Jefferson, right? So now, what now? The quote appears on flags and t-shirts of those who imagine themselves to be private militias, defending Second Amendment rights and all too often also defending white supremacy. Timothy McVeigh was wearing a t-shirt with this quote on it when he bombed the Oklahoma Federal Building, right? As was a man who unsuccessfully attempted the assassination of President Obama, right? The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Sometimes just the tree of liberty is the key in on this one. And the violence, that sense of redemptive violence, will also run through America's self-understanding. It's not going to go away. From the Revolutionary era, liberty was to be secured at all costs. It's a good question to ask ourselves, each of us. Let's move to this one. We see Patrick Henry, whom you also read. Liberty was to be secured at all costs. And Patrick Henry can ask, is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? He says, forbid it, Almighty God, right? He's making a speech here, very dramatic. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death at all costs. And then the end of the declaration, as the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. There's the American exceptionalism built in there. God wants this nation to flourish, right? That's wrapped up in these founding documents. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And so this is it's worth asking yourself. This is a nice meditative moment. Is there anything to which you would pledge your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor? Because if there is, that's the center of your mythos. If there is, that's the center of what theologians like Tillich would call, that's your religion. That's your ultimate concern, right? What is it that you would pledge it all to and give it all for? So what can we take from all of this? The bold statements, the violence, the reverberation of revolutionary rhetoric into today. What we take is this pairing, individual rights and the common good, or put a different way, liberty and security. If there is to be freedom in America, as established in the Revolutionary period and consistent throughout, if there is to be freedom in America, it will exist in the active tension between the two. Grow complacent and you will live under tyranny. That's the American narrative. That's the mythos. That's the message of the revolution, as it is of Senator Cory Booker, whom I quoted earlier. There cannot be too specific a predetermined right answer, right? Like, what does this balance look like? Context changes, right? And so we change with it. Contemporary social norms change, and so we respond to them. But we did not dig these wells, going back to Booker. We cannot let ourselves grow fat, dumb, and happy. Complacency is the surest road to tyranny. And that's what we're going to take from the Revolutionary period. Next, we will turn to the National Anthem and the ways in which it has played a role in contemporary national discussions about our shared sense of values.